that large tan homestead is where the first large summer home was ever built here on the lake. It was called Maple Lawn, built on the site in 1870 for Shelton Sturgis. He and his brothers were business partners and each had summer homes in the area. Now the old mansion was torn down over a decade ago and that new one was built
Đây
in
là
this
đi
place.
Lake Geneva
Now the Sturgis family was also
Wisconsin
heavily involved in the grain storage and the grain elevator business, and they later founded a number of banks in Chicago. We are now passing a group of homes known as the Geneva Manor subdivision, founded in 1926. The manor is built on 37 acres of the Levi Z. Leiter estate, which was known as Linden Lodge and dated back to 1879. Leiter had become partners with a man named Marshall Field, and together they began an apartment store operation known as Field, Leiter and Company. But then Leiter and Field parted ways in 1881, and you're probably more familiar with the store that came out of that split. That was Marshall Fields. Now that main mansion, which stood behind the subdivision's H&M Park area, originally contained more than 30 rooms. Inside were 19 fireplaces, one of them even located in the master bathroom. Now some of you guys may have already noticed that the majority of the piers out here on the lake are white. Now there is no specific regulation along the shore about what your pier color has to be, but if you look at pier number 20, it is a light brown color. Now that may just be to match the house in the back or keep your feet nice and cool in the summertime. But here at the cruise line, we just like to say that Pier 20 has yet to come to the pier pressure. Okay, I know that was pretty bad, but the jokes get much worse.
Đẹp không cả nhà ơi. Đây là cái lake ở Geneva thuộc tiểu bang Wisconsin, cách Chicago khoảng 2 tiếng đồng hồ. Lake ở đây đẹp không cả nhà.
That white, handsome Victorian boathouse on the shoreline is one of the few remaining structures of an estate known as Snug Harbor. Snug Harbor was built in 1881 for Mr. and Mrs. George Sturgis, the brother of Shelton Sturgis of Maple Lawn. George and Mary, who you recall donated the first library and library park, built a large French chateau home on the site. Their home contained 20 main rooms with enough bedrooms for their 9 children. And then in 1947, their estate became known as Covenant Harbor Bible Camp, owned and operated by the Evangelical Covenant Churches of America. So today, Covenant Harbor Bible Camp and the Geneva Bay Center host many different youth and family programs throughout the year. Now this next group of homes is called Geneva Bay Estates and is built on the former site of a large and beautiful estate known as the Butternuts. It was completed in 1874 for Nathaniel Kellogg Fairbank, president of the N.K. Fairbank Company, which was Chicago's leading manufacturer of soap. Now the Fairbanks home took up roughly the same area as those first 3 homes in the subdivision, but shortly after the home was completed in 1875, it did burn to the ground. However, firemen, family, and servants were able to save the furnishings, the handsome wood trim, ornately carved mantelpieces, and even some of the staircases. Undeterred, Mr. Fairbank had work begin the following Monday morning to rebuild his home from its original plans. And in 1895, a 5-hole golf course was added to the estate grounds. It was here on Mr. Fairbank's golf course that many of the millionaires living at the lake were introduced to the relatively new game of golf. So later that year, they established the Lake Geneva Country Club that we will see later in the tour.
Đây là một cái lake các bạn ạ. Đến đây mọi người chỉ đến đây để đi cho nó mát mẻ. Khí hậu ở đây thì mát lắm. Nhiệt độ khoảng đó chỉ có 20-21 độ C bữa nay thôi. Cảm ơn 10.000 người đang ở trên đường like của mình nhá. Nhìn thấy mình đi đến lake này để mình quay cho mọi người cùng xem nhá. của tháng 8. Nếu như mà cuối của tháng 9 đấy, hoặc tháng 10 thì cái dãy cây này trời nó sẽ đẹp vô cùng. Cây của nó sẽ chuyển thành màu xanh đỏ tím vàng ở chỗ này đấy, nó cứ vàng vàng đỏ rồi cái lá nó chưa, nó kiểu vào mùa thu ấy, thì nó đẹp như một bức tranh. Nhưng mà hôm nay thì nó chưa tới mùa các bạn ạ, cho nên là lá nó chưa đổi màu. Nhưng mà khi mà lá đổi màu thì thời tiết sẽ lạnh lắm.
So until now, I've had to ask you to use your imagination to picture what some of these homes and estates have looked like. However, for the next few miles of shoreline, most of the properties remain relatively intact and unchanged, but when they were built in the heyday of our Newport of the West period, and this was in reference to Newport, Rhode Island, the famous summer resort on the East Coast. Blacktop, this white home with a red roof and chimneys, is typical of the homes built during Lake Geneva's golden era. Blacktop was built in 1881 for John T. Lester, who was a prominent member of the Chicago Board of Trade. Now, all these next 6 upcoming properties are especially interesting, as they are currently, or were at one point, all a part of the Wrigley estate. Under William and P.K. Wrigley, the family had amassed vast business, sports, and real estate holdings. Now, at the time of P.K.'s passing in 1977, the family's interests had included the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company, the Chicago Cubs, Wrigley Field, the Wrigley Building in downtown Chicago, as well as real estate holdings in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, and most of Catalina Island off the coast of Southern California.
Mấy cái nhà kia là toàn những cái nhà của những người giàu, rồi của những cái người mà nhiều tiền mới ở đây.
Now this white home with the green trim and the brick around the perimeter is the first home on the Wrigley complex. It was called North Woodside and was constructed in 1876 for General Henry Strong. He was president of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. Now, in later years, North Woodside was owned by Olaf Nelson T. Vander, who is credited with numerous inventions. One invention of his, which proved to be quite successful, was the sanitary milk bottle cap. That is that small cardboard disc stamped at the top of old glass milk bottles. Now, it is said that that simple invention enabled Mr. T. Vander to retire here at the lake at the ripe old age of 26, a multi-millionaire.
Cái nhà kia là toàn những nhà triệu phú ở đây thôi mọi người ạ.
Now this next part of the estate is called Hillcroft. The estate began in the 1880s as a small hunting lodge for architect Henry Lord Gay, who was originally named Gay Lynn. From 1927 until 1966, Hillcroft, as it was renamed, served as P.K. Wrigley's summer residence and later as his guest house. Now, this home does incorporate many of the architectural features of the original home and the remaining buildings on the estate, but it's actually only roughly a third of the size of the original home. Now, that home sold in 2018 at a price of $11.25 million, which at that time was the highest price paid for a home on the lake. Now, this next home was called Green Gables, and was P.K. Wrigley's main resident at the time of his passing in 1977. Now, this is actually not the original Green Gables. The original home, called Blythe Bonnie, dated back to 1892. It had about 30 bedrooms and 20 bathrooms, many of which featured gold-plated fixtures. Now, the old home was torn down in 1955, and the new one was completed in 1966. And at the time, it was considered state-of-the-art, as everything from that flagpole on the front lawn to the drapery indoors was all controlled electronically. Okay, now some of you guys might be thinking, wow, the Wrigley's fine decided to downsize a little bit with this next home right here. Now, I'm sure that was not their planning, because this is just their pool and their spa house, and it's on a Summerwood. Now, that barn-shaped building with a gabled roof is the Wrigley Boathouse. It is a part of the original Green Gables estate and is a winter quarters for the Wrigley fleet. And right next door is the newest home on the Wrigley complex. It was completed in 2014 and it is called Lakewood.
Mọi người biết sao mấy cái nhà này toàn bên trong còn mấy chục cái phòng ngủ thôi, mà toàn của những nhà triệu phú và những của những giống như là
Now that brown building is called Deadwood.
Giống như
It is made up of a series of boathouses and was
President.
built in 1910 to house 4 steam yachts. Now the property does briefly interrupt the Wrigley estate at the shoreline, but it does continue a half of a mile back with the Wrigley Arabian Horse Farm and polo field. Now as we round this small point of land, we will get a good view of Winchwood, the final home on the Wrigley complex.
Nói chung là xung quanh ở
Winchwood
đây
was
nhà nào cũng
constructed
đắt
in
tiền mọi người.
1902 for Charles Hutchinson, who was a trustee and treasurer of the University of Chicago and founder of the Art Institute down in Chicago. Charles and his wife Frances built a rambling 3-story home with a definite English country influence. But following Mr. Hutchinson's death in 1932, the property eventually landed under the stewardship of the University of Chicago for scientific study before finally falling victim to subdivision and sale. Then in 1957, Winchwood was sold to Clarence Mitchell, who had the top 2 floors removed, destroyed much of the sanctuary, and modernized the home to its present 1-story ranch style. He then kept the home for little more than a year before it was then purchased by the Wrigley family, and Winchwood is still owned by the Wrigley family to this day. Now this actually does complete the Wrigley estate, originally taking up about a mile of shoreline here on beautiful Geneva Lake.
Cái cô hướng dẫn viên cô đang muốn nói là tất cả cái nhà mà xung quanh đây là toàn nhà giàu đấy mọi người ạ. Toàn nhà của ông triệu phú với tỷ phú ở nước Mỹ này.
It was constructed for Edward F. Swift, the son of Gustavus Swift, founder of the Swift Meatpacking Company in Chicago. The estate was called Villa Hortensia, named for Edward's wife Hortense. Now the property did sell in October of 2022 for around $17 million, making it the 3rd most expensive property ever sold in the state of Wisconsin. Now this next home we are approaching right now is the 1st most expensive property ever to be sold in the state of Wisconsin. It was sold for $36 million, setting a new real estate record for the state. Now many consider this home to be the most beautiful on the lake, and it's a stunning example of Georgian architecture. It was known as Wadsworth Hall when completed in 1906 for Norman Wade Harris of the Harris Trust and Savings Bank down in Chicago, but known today as BMO Harris Bank. In 1920, the estate was purchased by Walden W. Shaw, co-founder of the Yellow Taxi Cab Company in Chicago, and was renamed the Stenning. By the 1930s, it was owned by Shaw's son-in-law, Daniel F. Peterkin Jr., who was president of the Morton Salt Company. That estate then remained in the Shaw-Peterkin family for nearly 80 years before it was sold to an investment advisor named Richard Driehaus. Now, Mr. Driehaus had that property meticulously restored in 1999, and as you can see, it is truly a fine example of historic preservation. Now, Mr. Driehaus was a very generous man, having donated over $95 million to various charities throughout his foundation. He was also known very locally here for the lavish birthday party he threw for himself every July, with elaborate themes, famous entertainment, and over 1,000 guests. Now each year the party had a different theme, and the evening had always ended with a lavish fireworks display over the lake. Now some of the more memorable entertainers who have performed at his parties have included the band Chicago, Jay Leno, Martin Short, the Beach Boys, and Diana Ross. Now, a pretty popular question I do get on my tour is asking if I live on the lake. Now, the simple answer is yes, I am very lucky. If you look to the shoreline by that orange canopy, you will see my 1-bedroom, no bathroom log cabin. Now, I currently am sitting at my tips for a door. It does get a little drafty here in the winter time. Now, of course, I'm kidding. I could never afford any lakefront property. Ridiculously expensive. It costs anywhere from around $20,000 to $25,000 per linear foot of land along the lakeshore.
Nhà kia là 25 triệu đô, sợ chưa? Nhà nào cũng hàng triệu đô vậy.
Now this next home, nestled back among the trees, is appropriately called House in the Woods. The home was completed in 1906 for Mr. Adolphus K. Bartlett, a wholesale hardware distributor and one of the founders of what is now True Value Hardware. Now, because contractor Richard Suter was busy building other large homes at the same time, social plans were made to complete the home on schedule. Mr. Suter then went to Delavan, Wisconsin, just 10 miles away, and borrowed a 3-ring circus tent from P.T. Barnum Circus, who kept their circus there.